Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. This video is all about the basic principles for our chopping board, about the timber, about the glue up, and some basic information about how the grain in timber works and how that affects our chopping board. To start off with, you would have done some designs about the way you want your chopping board to turn out. Had some ideas about the different types of timber that you've seen in other chopping boards and the general shape that you're going to go with. Now, once we've got all that work done and we've done our research, we can start looking at the timber selection and gluing together our chopping board. Now to start off with, Mr. Glinner and I have already set up and cut your timber down to an appropriate size. So we've got it to the length you need and we've got it two smooth edges on it ready for gluing. Specifically, we've gone and got the timber together for you, which is this one here, the Blackwood. Now this is Blackwood Capricornia. It's grown up near Queensland, okay? So that's your darker timber that we've got. The lighter timber that you see here, this is pine, and specifically Pinus radiata. Now your pine and your Blackwood have some specific things about them like any timber. One of those things is to do with the grain in the timber. Timber has grain based on the way the cells of the timber build up together as the tree grows. Now in any piece of timber, this one's a good example, we can see that the grain lines that we look at on the edge of the piece of timber come from one end of the timber and they tend to point out towards one side. Okay, so going through the timber in an angled fashion. Now this is an exaggeration, but I can see that in general, I can see that the grain is heading in that direction. So on my piece of timber, I'm going to make a mark on the top edge saying that's the general direction of my timber. Once I've done that, and I'm going to do this for each of my different pieces of timber, I'm going to lay them all out in a fashion that I think really suits my design. You can see in my board here that I've gone for a nice dark piece of Blackwood in the middle, two bits of pine, and then a couple of lighter pieces of Blackwood on the outside. These are all about the same thickness, but we do have some thinner pieces you can add to your design if that's the way you want to go. Once we've got that all set up, we've looked at the grain, we can see that it's going in one direction, we're getting close to ready to glue up. But before we do that, I want to talk about one more thing to do with the grain lines in the timber we've got for you. Now we've talked about how timber is cut out of a log. Out of a round log, we do cuts across the log closer to the outsides, and that's what we call backsawn timber, and it gets these big wide growth rings in it. In the case of what you guys will be using, we've trimmed it up, we've milled it specifically so that it has quite straight grain lines running through from the top of the thickness to the base. Alright, the benefit of this is that we end up with quite a solid piece of timber that resists the use that it will have and the wear that it will have through using it as a chopping board, and that way it's going to last longer. Specifically, that's really important with our pine, as the pine's a softer timber. With the Blackwood, it is a hardwood. All right, hardwoods resist wear and they can generally take a bit more use. So once we're happy with the design we've got, we put all our pieces of timber together, check that it's all good, and we're at the point where we're ready to glue up. All our grain is going in the right direction, and that's going to help us later on when we go to planing up our board. So at this point here, you're probably going to come and grab me, and we'll check through it and make sure that everything's right and ready for your glue up. I can also check that mine is about the same size as my A4 sheet of paper. It's a little bit wider and a little bit longer, but that's okay. From here, we can pop it into our vise and start the glue up. Before we do that though, we're going to do what's called a dry fit. So I'm going to come over to my vise. You guys have this on every corner of your bench, or at least on two of them. And I'm going to start by opening up my vise to the right width. That way, when I go to glue it up, I'm ready to go. So I'm going to wind it out and check that it's the right width for my timber. And yep, it is. Next thing I do with my glue that we've got here is start that glue up process. I know that I'm ready to roll. This way, I'm not going to have any issues when I go to do the glue up. I'm not going to have to take it out I'm just going to be able to put it in and leave it. I'm going to start with the outermost piece of timber that goes against the inner jaw of my vise. Using that piece of timber, I'm going to run a bead of glue along the inside edge, not the one that goes against the vise. Once I've run that bead, and you can see here that I'm not doing it in this video, but you'll understand it a bit more when we do that in class. I'm going to pop that in my vise, up against that inside jaw. The next piece of timber, I only need to run that bead on one side, so I'll go ahead and do that. Bead on that side. Pop that against the piece that's already in there. I grab another piece, and again, bead on one side, pop it in the vise. This I'm doing fairly quickly, because it's important that we don't let that glue set at all while we're going through this process. That we don't want it dripping out onto the ground. So we need to be careful about the amount that we use. Next piece of timber, a bead down that side, pop it in the vise, and last piece, no bead on this piece. Why? Because we've already got that bead of glue there, and we don't want to glue it to our vise. So we chuck that piece in. We make sure that the board is quite central in the vise. That way the pressure is going to be even across all the pieces. And then we tighten the vise up. There we go. It's tightened up in the vise now. I've probably got a bit of glue dripping out, and we'll clean that up with a nice damp rag. At this point here, I just double check that it's nice and tight, and I'm done. So that's the glue up. Once that's glued and it's been drying overnight, the next day it'll get taken out for you probably, or if we have a lesson you'll take it out, and the next lesson you'll come and your board will be looking something like that, nice and solid, all dried, all glued up. And there you go, you've got the beginnings of your chopping board. From here we can start to do the shaping, planing, etc. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed.